Welcome back everybody to some more DeFi Kingdoms. I'm very excited about this episode because in this one I am going to be breaking down step by step the best strategy for purchasing a hero. That is perhaps the most common question people have in the Discord. Anybody who's new to the game, they always want to know what's a good price for a hero, what's the best hero I can get, what sort of thing should I be looking for when I'm buying a hero, is this one better, is that one better, is this one worth more, is that one worth more? It can get very complex, and I'm going to break it down step by step so that by the end of this video, you know that you're confidently purchasing a hero and getting the best value possible. Before we begin, I do require that you watch the previous video in this series about what a hero is and all of the attributes a hero has, because if you don't understand all of the hero attributes, none of this is going to make sense to you. You must fully understand what a hero is before you can even begin to look at this stuff. And so definitely go watch my previous video, I break it down in depth. One more thing to keep in mind is that all of the information in this video is going to be making one assumption, and that assumption is that it is actually a good time to be buying a hero. There are always the best times to get in on the hero market and the best times to get out, and that is a whole nother topic in and of itself. If the whole crypto market is taking a giant dump, is it really a good time to be buying a hero? Well, maybe yes, maybe you're getting them cheaper than you otherwise would, or maybe not. Maybe you are putting yourself in unnecessary risk of your investment going down dramatically. One recent example is the miners, the miner heroes in the game. They are selling at a premium right now. That's because with the mining quests, a lot of the people who got in the game early want to get miners so that they can use the mining quest to unlock some of their locked jewels. So right now, if you look at the market, you will notice that miners are selling considerably higher than any of the other professions. So in my opinion, it may not be the best time to get a miner. I do think they will come down in value as other quests and other features for heroes get released, but maybe you disagree with me. The whole point of this is that in order for you to take any of the information I'm about to go over into account, you need to already have made the assumption that, okay, it's a good time to buy a hero, I want to buy a hero, so then you can go ahead and apply some of these things. Once you've done that, we can go ahead and get started with this. I have broken this down into 3 simple steps. Step number 1 is going to be clearly and specifically define what you want out of a hero. It is not good enough to say, I want the best hero possible, or I want the best value hero out there. You have to clearly and specifically define what you want out of your hero purchase. So, for example, you may want the best value gardener or any other profession, or you may want the best value mythic or other rarity. You may want the cheapest one possible so that you can at least get some skin in the game or start accumulating as many heroes as possible. Or you may want the best value hero for summoning. There are many different things that you can look at, including maybe the most optimized for a specific stat like strength. The point is that you are narrowing your search down. This can also be a combination of any other thing. If you do not do this step, you will lose money. You cannot go into the tavern expecting to find a hero with a vague idea of, hey, I just want the best one, I want the best one possible, whatever's the best one. That's not going to work. Like I mentioned in the previous video, there are just so many different attributes to a hero that if you don't narrow it down, you're going to be looking at way too many variables that make this whole process way too confusing, and then you're going to end up overpaying for a hero or not getting what you really wanted out of one. So this is very important, the most important step. Notice the wording I used here in this presentation. You'll see that the word value has come up a lot. And so I want you to completely have a different idea of how you're going to go about this purchase. Think of it not as you are buying a hero, think of it as you are buying value. And so step number 2, once you've defined what it is that you're trying to get out of a hero, I want you to convert that goal from number 1 into a hypothetical unit of value. I know that sounds a little bit confusing. I'm going to go through an example here soon, and that's going to make a lot of sense. So for example, if you want the best value gardener, don't go into the tavern and start looking at the best gardener that you can get. You must first look at the data in the game and then convert gardening into units of value. And once you go into the tavern, instead of looking at heroes, you're going to be looking at it through a different lens. You're going to be looking at units of value. So again, buy units of value, not heroes. Number 3, I want you to look for areas of value and opportunity. I want you to think creatively and not worry about what other people are doing. In fact, you want to take advantage of things that other people are not looking at. For example, if you've watched my last video, you should have a lot of understanding regarding how heroes work, more so than your average player in this game, and so you can look at certain things that other people are not watching. For example, recessive traits in the genetics. Another thing you will note is that the secondary class can play a big role in your hero. A lot of people just look at the primary class and they kind of brush off the second class to the side, and so there's a lot of value and opportunity to be found just by looking at things like recessive traits or the secondary class. People may be putting their hero up for sale cheaper than they're really worth if they're not really considering those things. Now that we have these 3 steps on how to purchase a hero, let me take you through an example and we're going to purchase a hero together. So number 1, clearly and specifically define what you want out of a hero. Me personally, I've decided that I want to get the best value gardener possible. I really want to get into the gardening profession so that I can attach a gardener to my liquidity pool, start earning rewards, and so that's my number 1. I want the best value gardener possible. So now I'm going to go on to number 2. I need to convert that goal into a hypothetical unit of value. So let's do that. Bam, here it is, the spreadsheet of doom. I know it looks very intimidating, but I'm going to go through this with you. I created this in order to convert my goal in a hero, that is the best value gardener possible, into a digestible unit. So there's a lot of information here, but I'm going to be going over it, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. A very mathematical and statistical breakdown so that we can get the best value for our jewels possible when purchasing a hero. When trying to convert what it is that you want into a unit of value, you must first understand it. In my case, I want the best gardener possible, so the first thing I have to do is I must understand gardening. I must understand how the profession works, what makes you good at gardening, what makes you bad at gardening, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of data out there, and one thing I want to point your attention to is this comment by one of the developers of the game, Hubert Cumberdale. So for the profession quests, at least for the initial ones coming out, stats carry about 1/3 of the weight in deciding the outcome. Your profession skill carries about 2/3, and then your profession gene adds something like 10% bonus on top of that. This last one is a very hand-wavy simplification of what happens. So what am I getting out of that? What I'm getting is that your stats only account for 1/3 of 90%, so essentially 30% of your success in a quest. That is, a gardener, if your profession is a gardener and you're leveling up the gardening skill, that accounts for about 70% of the whole thing. So at the end of the day, the stats don't matter as much as you think it does, at least if you're looking for a specific profession. So in this case, I've already narrowed my search down to a hero dramatically. I know that I'm going to be filtering by gardening profession because it is not worth it at all for me to get a hero that is not a gardener if gardening is my goal. Remember this chart here from the previous episode. It breaks down which classes are best for what profession based on the stats that they're good at. So for example, the best gardeners are going to be Sage, Paladin, Summoner. These are all going to be really good gardeners. However, here's the catch. For example, a Sage has a combined score of Wisdom and Vitality of 150, the probability of those stats leveling up. A Paladin is 145, so it's only a little 5-point difference. Now you have to amplify that by the fact that the stats only account for about 30% of your success in a gardening quest. So it's minimal at the end of the day. So right off the bat, I already know that there are a lot of people overpaying for heroes in the market. They go in and they're going to pay an astronomical amount of money for a Sage compared to a Paladin just because it's at the top of this list. Just because it's at the top, though, it doesn't mean it makes a very big difference. Again, this 5 points, it's only 30%, which is negligible almost. So now that I understand gardening a little bit, I'm going to start filling out some of the data in these tables. So I already know, based on this, that for me to get the best value gardener possible, I automatically start ignoring any profession that's not a gardener. So I am going to be filtering by gardening. I'm not going to look at any other heroes So I'm going to look at the current market price for all of these heroes. I'm going to look just a gardening filter, the price for a common, an uncommon, a rare, legendary, a mythic, and then I'm going to look at gardening sages and fill this out, so on and so forth. So how do we do that? Let me show you. You are going to go to the tavern, which is where you purchase a hero. You're going to click agent and buy heroes. And here are all the heroes for sale. And again, I need to filter by gardening. So I'm going to go to attributes, I'm going to apply. So now it's filtered by gardeners. These are only gardeners. What is a floor price if you're not familiar with NFTs? A floor price refers to the cheapest you can buy a hero. That's all that means. So right now, the floor price for a gardener is 39.51 jewels. So I would go back to my spreadsheet here and I will put 39.5. So next I would look for the floor price of an uncommon gardening hero. And the way I would do that is I would filter by just the uncommon. So I would move these little sliders here. I would apply. And now we got all the uncommon gardening heroes. And you can see that the floor price is going to be 44 jewel. So I'll put that on here, and you can see how I'm going to fill out this chart here. It does take a little bit of time, but you got to put the work in if you're going to get a good deal. So I'll edit once I finished out this table. Now that I have this table filled out, the only thing I'll be doing with it is giving it a quick glance so that I can find general trends that are occurring in the market and get a general idea of what gardeners are doing overall within the market. So one thing that draws my attention immediately. By the way, this is all organized by the best gardening classes. So Sage is the best, followed by Paladin, so on and so forth. So one thing that draws my attention immediately is that you are definitely paying a premium for a Sage. Look at those floor prices. Compare it just to the next down, the Paladin. And remember, this was only a 5-point difference, and you're paying almost double. Definitely not worth it in my opinion. So you can already start to figure out some things. If you're in the market for the best gardener possible, you already know that it's not worth your money to get a Sage, and people are overpaying for Sages if what they're interested in is being a gardener. And that's the idea of analyzing this table. It's just to get a good feeling of what's going on in the market. For example, you can see a lot of other trends on here. Let's say it's really important to you to get a mythic. You really want a mythic gardener, no ifs, ands, or buts. You can already notice that you can find some value here. For example, look, there's a ninja for $12.99, there's a pyre for $4.20, there's an archer for $4.03, but if you look up here, you can actually pick up a good deal on a mythic knight for $3.70 compared to some of the others. Now remember, this only is looking at purely gardening. So for example, this 15,000 jewel mythic monk, why is it so overpriced? Well, it turns out this is a Generation 0 monk, so obviously it's very well valued. So you have to keep those things in mind as well. But if you're looking from a gardening perspective, you can definitely find some trends here. Another one, for example, would be a priest and a wizard. So they have the same score. These are equally good gardeners, but you'll notice that you're paying a little bit of a premium on the wizard. A legendary wizard is $2.99 compared to a legendary priest is only $2.50. So you could get the same value in terms of gardening for a much cheaper price by going with a priest. If you spend enough time looking at this table, you'll find all sorts of interesting things. So you'll notice that the worst possible gardener that you can get, the floor price is 42 jewels. So you can get a much better gardener. You can already see that. You can get a thief that's much better for a lot cheaper. Now that I have a general sentiment about what's going on in the gardening market, I can start to break this down numerically, mathematically, statistically, really get nitty and gritty to make sure I'm getting the best value possible. That's where this behemoth of a table down here comes in. The point of this table is to assign a numerical value to a hero. So for example, a common sage. So I got, 5 different sages here, a common, uncommon, rare, legendary, mythic, so on and so forth for every class in the game. So the next goal here is to assign a numerical value to it. So a common sage has a starting value of 22. What's this 22? It's the sum of wisdom and vitality, the two stats that are important for gardening. How did I find this? Well, I looked in the market at common sages, and those are the base stats for a common sage. For a paladin, it's 20. For a summoner, it's 18. For a priest, it's 19, so on and so forth. What about an uncommon? Well, if you look up here, you'll notice that there's actually a fairly complex formula as to how I got 22.57. For a rare, you can see the formula is even more complex. For a legendary, look at that legendary formula, for lack of better terms. And for a mythic, look at that behemoth. That is a hell of a formula. So I'm going to explain to you how I statistically derived these formulas. If you're interested in that math, keep watching. If not, look in the timeline and skip to the next section. For those of you who are interested in this statistics, let me go over how I am deriving some of these formulas. This first one relates to the uncommon heroes, and you'll understand why this is going to apply to every uncommon hero, but for this purpose, I am using the Sage as an example. So beginning here on the left, what is this 22? Well, I just showed you how I got that. This is the base stats for a Sage in terms of wisdom and vitality. They start with 22 total points distributed between those two stats. Recall from the previous video that uncommon heroes get 2 additional stat points every 5 levels, and recall that they are going to be randomly assigned and mutually exclusive, meaning you can't pick them and both of those points cannot end up on the same stat. So for the purpose of gardening points, we're interested in the probability that we get points assigned to wisdom or vitality. That's what this big formula here is trying to account for. So there are 3 possibilities with those dice rolls. There's the probability that you get really lucky and both of those stat points end up on wisdom and vitality. There is the probability that you're moderately lucky and you get 1 point either to vitality or wisdom. And then there's the possibility that you get unlucky and you get no points to either of them. If you get no points at all, we don't even have to account for that in the equation because that's going to be a score of 0. So mathematically, you don't even need to put it there. So an uncommon hero is going to get this bonus added to their score every 5 levels beginning here at level 1. The left half of the equation is going to look at the probability that you get really lucky with your roll and both stats end up on vitality and wisdom. What is the probability of that occurring? Again, that's what this left half of the equation is going to show us. So the game is going to go through and try to assign the first random stat. So what is the probability that it lands either on vitality or wisdom? Well, it's going to be 2/8 because there are 8 total stat points and 2 of them are vitality and wisdom, of course. I hope that makes sense. So assuming you do get that 2/8 chance and you land on either vitality or wisdom, what's the chance that your second roll is going to land on the second stat that you're interested in? Well, it's going to be 1/7 because, for example, let's say this first roll we got lucky, we landed on vitality. What's the chance that we get wisdom next? Well, this time it's going to be 1/7 because we've taken vitality out of the equation. So this drops down to 7. So now our probability is 1 out of 7. So the probability of getting both of those rolls is going to be 2/8 times 1/7. The times is the probability of these two things occurring together. If this were a plus sign, it would be the probability of either this happening or that happening. So again, just to clarify, this is the probability that the first roll is either vitality or wisdom, and then this is the probability that the second roll is the other stat which didn't land the first time. Both of these together account for that. Now, why am I multiplying this whole thing times 2? Because if this event were to occur, I want to be able to assign it 2 additional points because we got 2 stat points. That's where this 2 is coming from. Next, the right side of the equation is going to account for the probability that you get either vitality or wisdom, but not both. What is the chance of that happening? Well, it's going to be on the first roll, you're going to have a 1/8 chance to get that specific stat. So for example, let's say vitality. What's the chance that you're going to get vitality on the first roll? 1 out of 8. If you don't get it on the first roll, you have a second chance. And so what is the chance of that happening? 1 out of 7. Again, we've taken 1 out of the equation here because we missed the first roll, so now it's just 1 out of 7. Remember, a plus sign is going to be either or, so this is saying what is the chance that I get vitality on the first roll or on the second roll. I'm going to multiply this whole thing by 2 because this is both for vitality and wisdom. So what is the chance that I get it on the first roll or second roll for vitality, and what's the chance that I get this on the first roll or second roll for wisdom. So that's where that times 2 is coming from. That whole thing is going to get multiplied by 1, because if this event were to happen, we would be getting 1 additional stat point to vitality or wisdom. So that's how all this formula is coming together. This probability here is going to be a fraction. That probability there is going to be a fraction, and we're going to add that to the 22 to give a base stat. Now for my table, you notice that I have some intervals at level 10, 25, 50, and 100. And so for those equations, I'm multiplying this part out by the correct level. So for example, at level 50, I would take this whole part of the equation and multiply it by 50, and that would be the expected amount of points that I would have on an uncommon hero at level 50, just based on those extra stats that the uncommon hero gets. I know this is kind of confusing, but hopefully I explained that well enough to where it makes sense. Here is the formula for a rare hero, and you can tell it looks a lot beefier already. It's going to get progressively more complex as we go through this. Recall from the previous video that a rare hero will get 3 random mutually exclusive bonus stats, plus another 1 random stat to one that may have already received that bonus. So this is the formula. 22 again is the base level, and then we must consider what's the probability that out of that initial roll for 3 stats, 2 of them end up on vitality and wisdom. So let's take a look at some of that. So the first possibility for that would be that you get it on the first roll, you get either vitality or wisdom on the first roll, and then you get the second stat on either the second or third roll. So that is a little complex, so let's break it down. So here in this roll, there's a 2/8 chance that you get either vitality or wisdom. And then we need to figure out what's the chance that either on the second or third roll, we're going to get the other stat that we didn't get from that 2/8 roll. So let's use vitality for simplicity. 2/8 chance that we get vitality on this roll. What's the chance that we're going to get wisdom on the second or third? Well, on the second roll, we have a 1/7 chance. If we do not get it on that roll, we have a 1/6 chance to get it on the third roll. Again, because each time you're removing 1 stat from the potential pool. So this part of the formula here is telling us that on the first roll, we get either vitality or wisdom. And then either on the second or the third roll, we get the second stat. But something else is possible. Another possibility would be that we do not get vitality or wisdom on this first roll, but we do get it on the second and third roll. That's another way that we could still end up getting both of them. So that's what this part of the formula is going to account for. So what's the probability that we do not get vitality or wisdom on the first roll? Well, it's going to be 6 out of 8. But if we do not get it on the first roll, the only way we can get both of those bonuses is if we get it on the second and third roll. That's why there's multiplication here instead of addition. So chance that we do not get it on the first roll, and the chance that we get it on the second roll, and the chance that we get it on the third roll. So combining these 2 probabilities together, that's the probability that based on those 3 rolls for a rare hero, at least 2 of those points ends up on vitality and wisdom. Why am I multiplying this by 2? Because if these events were to happen, that would be 2 bonus stats that I'm getting towards gardening. What's the other event that can happen? Well, on those 3 rolls for the 3 additional stats on a rare hero, we could end up getting just vitality or wisdom, just one or the other instead of both. So the probability of that happening would be we have a 1/8 chance on the first roll, or we would have a 1/7 chance on the second roll, or a 1/6 chance on the third roll. That is the probability that we would get one of the stats on the 3 rolls. Why am I multiplying this by 2? Well, because this can happen either for vitality or for wisdom. That's the reason for the 2 over here. Why am I adding this 2/8 here? Remember, for a rare hero, you get 3 bonuses to mutually exclusive stats. That is what all of this is accounting for. And then on top of that, you get an additional stat, which could be anything, even if you've already gotten it here. So that's where the 2/8 is coming from. This whole part I'm multiplying by 1, because if these things were to happen, that will give me 1 additional stat point to vitality or wisdom and contribute towards gardening. I hope that makes sense. Now things are getting juicy. This is the formula for a legendary hero. Again, recall from the previous video that a legendary hero every 5 levels will get a bonus of +1 to 3 mutually exclusive stats, and then it'll get +1 to 2 mutually exclusive stats, including any that have already received a bonus, and then finally it'll get a +2 to a random stat that maybe also has already received a bonus. So a lot of that we've already derived in the previous formulas. So again, +1 to 3 mutually exclusive stats, we just went over that formula for the rare hero. So again, there's a chance of vitality or wisdom is 2/8, and then what's the chance that you get the other one on the second or third roll? Well, it's going to be all that here, or that you don't get the first stat on the first roll, but you get it on the second and third roll. That's that part there. Multiply times 2, because if this event were to happen, you would end up with 2 additional stat points towards gardening, that being vitality and wisdom. So that's that part of the equation. Here is the part of the equation if you were only to get 1 out of those 2 stats, so either vitality or wisdom. Again, 1/8 plus 1/7 plus 1/6, because you get 3 rolls to try and get that. Y times 2, because this can occur for vitality or wisdom. So there's that part of the equation. So all this has already accounted for that +1 to 3 mutually exclusive stats. So then we would get another chance of +1 to 2 mutually exclusive stats. What's the probability of that? Well, what's the probability of getting it to both vitality and wisdom? It's 1/8 times 1/7 multiplied by 2, because that event would give us +2 bonus. And then what's the chance that it only happens to either vitality or wisdom? 1/8 plus 1/7 times 2, because this can occur for either vitality or wisdom. And that's that. So now we have the +1 to 3 mutually exclusive stats over here, then +2 or +1 to 2 mutually exclusive stats over here, and then finally we have the +2 to a random exclusive stat, which is going to be a 2/8 chance. So that's how that behemoth of a formula has come to be. And this is the big daddy of them all. This is the formula for the mythic hero. Again, recall from the previous video that for a mythic hero every 5 levels you are going to get +2 to 3 mutually exclusive stats that are random, and then you're going to get +1 to 3 random mutually exclusive stats, including any that have already received a bonus. And then finally, you're going to get a +1 to another randomly generated stat. So 22 is again the base. Here is the probability that the first 3 rolls, you get 2 of those landing on vitality and wisdom. So that's there, and that's why that's a ×2. Here's the probability that those 3 rolls land on just vitality or just wisdom. And then we multiply it by 2, because there's 2 of the stats, vitality and wisdom. So that's the probability of that. So this is for that first 3 rolls that are going to be giving you 2 points all over here. That's why I'm multiplying by 2, because this time you're getting 2 bonus points instead of just 1 on the mythic hero. Then we're going to roll again for 3 mutually exclusive stats, but this time you're only going to get a ×1 bonus. So this is essentially the same formula that we just went over, but this time we're just going to be multiplying by 1. And then finally, the 1/8 here is going to be for that +1 to a random stat after all is said and done. It's going to be weird when I'm editing this. In my mind, everything I'm explaining makes sense, but I don't know if it's going to sound really confusing. I'm sorry if it did, but hopefully you can understand where I derive these formulas from, why I derive them, and why it's important to factor them in for me to determine how effective of a gardener a hero is going to be at the end of the day. I repeated these formulas for level 10, for level 25, for level 50, and for level 100, so we can get an idea of how these heroes progress, because obviously the higher rarity, the higher tier your hero, it's going to start to outscale some of the more common heroes at higher levels, so it's important to be able to look at that as well. You will notice the formula changes slightly when we're looking at these level stats. For example, here there's a base of 1.5, and that's the sum of the probabilities of increasing the wisdom and vitality. So the sage, for example, maybe it's 80% chance to increase wisdom, 70% chance to increase vitality, so that adds up to 1.5. For the paladin, you know, maybe it adds up to 1.45, so on and so forth. That's where that number's coming from. In addition to that, you'll notice that if this is your secondary class, I'm also adding points here as well. And there are formulas to account for that. So here you can already notice something very interesting. So for example, if you have a crappy gardener, for example, an archer, the worst you can get, but their secondary class is a priest, for example, you're gonna get by level 100, 32.5 extra points just on that secondary class, compared to if it was an archer, 18.75, so almost double. So you can see there's an area of opportunity here. If people aren't really looking at the secondary class, you can really capitalize on that. So at the end of the day, if you're not a big fan of the nitty-gritty math, these numbers represent statistically what each card should have in terms of vitality and wisdom, the two stat points that are important regarding gardeners. So at level 1, it's expected to have 22 points, at level 10, 37, at level 25, 59.5, level 50, 97, level 100, 172, and that's just for the primary class, and then of course we have the secondary. This does not account for a couple of things. Remember, when you level up, not only does it do all of the random rolls, which is what this is accounting for, but it also allows you to pick one of the stat points for you to upgrade, and then you also get Gaia's Blessing, in which you can pick 2 stats, which will each have a 50% chance of going up. I'm not accounting for that in these formulas, because you have control over that. So essentially, it's all the same for all of these, so we can factor that out. Now that I have these scores, I can calculate what is the best gardener that one can possibly get. Well, it's going to be a mythic primary sage with a secondary class of sage as well. So a mythic sage is the best gardener that you can get in the game. I also have the bonus table here for the blue and green stat bonuses. Remember, the green is a +2 to that stat no matter what, no matter at what level. And the blue is a 2% chance on the primary class roll and a +4% chance on the secondary class roll, essentially giving you an extra 6% chance to increase that stat. And so over the different levels, at level 100, it could ultimately add up to 6, so I am accounting for that as well. So now with this table in mind as well, again, what's the best possible gardener we could get? Well, a mythic sage that has a green and a blue stat in either vitality and or wisdom. With all that information, I can start filling in this table here. So I'm going to assign a maximum score to the best heroes. So again, our maximum hero is going to be a mythic sage with the 2 stat bonuses. So at level 1, we would get the level 1 primary class score. There's not anything for secondary class yet, but then we would get the stat bonuses from the green and blue stats over here. And so at level 1, we would expect a score of 27.3 being the best possible score any hero could get. At level 100, we will see that the formula is going to look at the primary score at level 100, the secondary for the secondary class, and then these stat bonuses here at level 100. So the best possible score that a hero could get for gardening at level 100 is 286.88. That's not the end of the story though. There are still 2 things I want to accomplish. I want to convert this number to 100 so it's much easier to read. I want to convert the best score to 100. The next thing is, remember, the developer said that stats only account for 1/3 of 90% of your success rate for a profession quest. So we need to make sure that this score here, 286.88, only accounts for 1/3 of the total final score that is going to be out of 100. That's where this adjustments table comes in. So your profession skill, which you level up by going on that profession quest, is going to be 60%, and it's going to be the same for all these heroes here because they're all going to be increasing them at the same rate. A mythic sage is not going to get gardening skill any faster than a common archer. Now there is a caveat to that, obviously. If your mythic sage is a little bit of a better gardener, theoretically it's probably going to be getting the profession skill at a higher rate, but that's almost impossible to calculate and probably fairly negligible at the end of the day, so just be aware I'm not accounting for that. 30% comes from the stats, 10% comes just from the fact that you're a gardener in the profession. What are these constants here? Well, this 1.08 is a constant that I'm going to have to multiply the maximum level 1 score over here to get a full 30 points, to get that maximum 30 points I would get out of the stats. The 0.56327, same principle, except to get the max level here for level 10. I hope that's starting to make sense. So at the end of the day, I can finally fill in this table, which is going to be the best score out of 100. So our Mythic Sage with the 2 stat bonuses should have a score of 100 across the board, because that's the best score possible. How is this derived? Well, let's look at level 100, for example. So it's going to take this raw score here. It is going to multiply it by the level 100 constant so that this score turns into the maximum 30 for stats, and then it's going to automatically add on the 60 for the profession skill and the 10 for the profession and give it the score of 100. What's something to note here that's very interesting? Well, I haven't filled out any other heroes yet. They all have a score of 0 on their skills, but their final score is already a 70. Why is that? Well, again, their profession skill and their profession together will account for 70% of the success as a gardener. So even with 0 stats, your archer, your common archer with no stat bonuses is about 70% as good as a Mythic Sage with 2 stat bonuses. I hope you can start to appreciate that at the end of the day, if what you're wanting is the best value for a gardener, then the stats really aren't going to make the biggest difference in the world. So let's play around with this a little bit. Let's say that we are looking at a reasonable gardener. Let's say it's a primary class warrior and a secondary class pirate, and it's a common card. So, you know, not the best gardener in the world, but let's theoretically see what would happen here. So I would go to this table and I would put warrior, pirate, and I would make it common. And I hate how Excel automatically makes this a little copyright symbol. That's so annoying. Okay, and then I would start filling this out. So at level 1, what would I expect this to be? Well, I can go to the table here. So at level 1, it would be this right here. And then nothing for the secondary class. So that's it right there, 14. Over here at this table, now you can start to appreciate the difference. So at level 1, a warrior pirate that's common is only going to be about 85% compared to the best possible hero that we can get. Let's look at level 100, for example. So let's go and do our warrior. Gosh, it's so confusing to look at this table sometimes. So a warrior at level 100, that's the primary class. And then to that, we're going to add the secondary pirate, which is common. So that one right there. And that'll be our level 100 stats. So a score of 119. And you can see that at level 100, it's gone down from 85% to 82%. And that's, of course, because a mythic card and a higher tier card is going to outpace some of the other ones as they level up. So now you can start to see how you compare this. But at the end of the day, this is still not what matters the most. What matters the most to me is how much are you paying for each one of these points? How much does 1 point out of a 100 for a Mythic Sage cost me? And how much does 1 point for a warrior pirate cost me? I view these as gardening value points. It is completely theoretical, I'm sure you appreciate by now, but it is a mathematical and statistical way to assign value to gardening within DeFi Kingdoms. That's where this table is going to come in. So a Mythic Sage, let me look here. Let's just assume there wasn't even a Mythic for sale, but let's assume it's going to cost about, I don't know, 2,500 jewel, like a Mythic Paladin would. So I would put the price here, 2,500, and this is going to calculate for me. So what this is calculating is how many points, how many gardening points am I purchasing with each jewel? So if I were to get this Mythic Sage at 2,500 jewels, each one of my jewels would only be purchasing me 0.04 gardening points. What about for the warrior pirate? Well, let me see what a common warrior was. 41. And with a pirate, let's say it's 43. Let's say we see one for sale at 43 jewels. So I put that in there, and you can see that at level 1, every one of my jewels that I spent buying this hero is getting me 1.986 gardening points. At level 100, it goes down a little bit because it doesn't scale as well, but I would still be getting 1.917 points of gardening per jewel that I spend. So I hope you can appreciate that although a mythic sage with 2 stat points in gardening is amazing and absolutely the best gardener you can get in the game, it is 100% not worth the money if all you're interested in is getting the best value gardener possible. We can do a funky little math here and do a division, and we can see that you are getting almost 48 times more value buying a warrior pirate that's common compared to a mythic sage if all you want is the best gardener possible. So now we can apply this data to real life. Let's go look in the tavern and let's see what sort of heroes are available in the market. So let me delete this guy here for now, and then let me delete that right there. Okay, let's go look at the market. So let's start here at the floor price. There is this nice gardener here. He's a thief monk, which is not too bad in terms of the classes that are good for gardening. So he's pretty decent. Not too bad. And so we can apply him to the spreadsheet. So he's a common thief monk. So going back to the spreadsheet, I'll put him over here. And then I'll just not put parentheses on this C, or else the Excel is going to make it a copyright symbol again. And now we can see what the data is going to look like. So a thief monk at level 1, that is common. So at level 1, it's only going to be 13 points. At level 10, let's go to the thief here, common, level 10. And then we got the monk secondary class at common. There we go. So that's what it's going to look like at level 10. And you know what? I didn't even check to see if it has some stat bonuses. So it does. So vitality, that's good. So I can go back to the spreadsheet and I can alter this data to also include the green stat point. There we go. So I'll edit once I'm done filling out this row. Okay, so I got all this filled out and you can see how this scales compared to the best possible hero we could get. And then we would plug in the cost here, which was 39.6. And there you go. So you can see that at least at level 1, we're purchasing 2.184 gardening points for every jewel that we spend. And it goes down a little bit with every level progression. But now we can kind of understand what a good value is. So now we would go back to the market and we'd kind of scroll to see if we can find something that may look a little bit more interesting. So just kind of scrolling here, for example. All right, an uncommon hero at level 44. And you can see, or at 44 jewels, but you can see that it's an archer wizard, which is pretty bad in terms of gardening. The archer is the worst gardener that you could get. So why don't we look a little bit further down? A knight thief, that's not too bad. A knight is pretty decent in terms of gardening. It's about a mid-tier. So let's look at this one for 45 jewels. Is it worth it? Your initial instinct may say, hey, it's only 6 jewels more. It probably is worth it, but let's mathematically figure that out. So it's going to have no stat bonuses in terms of gardening. So we can just look at this and we'll look at a knight thief that is uncommon on the spreadsheet. So let's do that. Knight thief, uncommon. And then for level 1, we're going to look right here. And remember to check the uncommon one. So 16.57, you can already see that it's a little bit better than that thief monk. So again, I'll edit once I finished this table here. So you can see that the scores definitely are higher than the thief monk. And over here in the final conversion, you can see that there is a little bit of a difference. So a couple percentages all the way through. The real question is it worth it? So then I would type in the price here. So this one's selling for 45 joules, and you will see that at this price, I'm actually only purchasing 1.96 gardening points per joule that I spend. So I'm still getting a much better value if I purchase this common thief monk, and I can save myself a little bit of joule. Very important you remember this though. This is strictly looking at gardening potential. Just gardening based on all the math that I just went over. This isn't taking into account summoning or any other potential that the hero has. For example, this thief monk could have 0 summons left, and this night thief could have 10 summons left. In which case, even though you're not getting as good of a value in terms of gardening, would you spend an extra 6 joules to get 10 summons? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, but those are things to consider as well. So that leads me to my next point. Once you identify a good value, so for example, this thief monk seems to be the best value for a gardening hero at the moment. I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler. I've played around a lot with this table and these numbers, and at the end of the day, generally, the cheapest hero that you find that is the gardening profession is going to be the best value that you can get. So if you're strictly worried about a profession, it's best to just get one at floor price. However, once I do identify one that I want to buy, I kind of go back to the market. So this one's selling for 39.6. Let's go back all the way to the top, and I'll look around, 1 to 2 joules above it to see if there's value. So I see that this guy, the one that we're looking at, he has 7 out of 7 summons, which is really good. So even the more expensive ones don't have as many summons. But let's flip this around, for example. Let's say that the one we're looking at has 1 out of 1 summons, and then this one that was a little bit more expensive had 7 out of 7. Would that be worth it to spend 0.4 joule more so you could get 10 or 6 extra summons? In my opinion, yeah, I guess it would be worth it, so I'd probably get the next one. So whenever you do identify the best value possible, you just kind of want to look at the similarly priced ones to see if there's a little bit of extra opportunity. And that goes back to the third rule for looking at hero values, is you want to identify areas of opportunity. Summoning potential is going to be one of them. Another one would be looking at the recessive traits. So ideally, when you're looking at recessive genes, your R1 or your first recessive gene, if it's the same as your primary class, then that's going to be good. That'll make it more likely for you to summon a higher tier hero if you try to do the correct summoning techniques. Now, I'm not going to go in depth about summoning here. That's going to be for another video, but the main point is once you identify the best value possible using this table, you want to look at the heroes around it, around the same price, and see if you are justified in maybe spending a little bit more based on other attributes like the summoning, recessive genes, stuff like that. Going back to this spreadsheet, it's important to note that this is very specific for gardening heroes. What is the best gardener value possible? That's what this spreadsheet is for. So it does need to change depending on what you're trying to accomplish. For example, I have another tab here. This is for foraging heroes, and it's going to be a little bit different based on trying to find the best forager possible. Anytime I want to look at something different, I'll have to meddle with some of these numbers. For example, once combat and PvP gets released, I'll have to rework a lot of these numbers. For example, if we find out that strength is really good and I want to get the best value strength possible, then I'd have to rework this looking specifically at strength. So understand the limitations here. This whole example we just went through, all the math here, all these numbers are very specific for gardening potential. The main thing I want you to take away are these 3 rules. Clearly and specifically define what you want out of a hero, then convert that into a hypothetical unit of value. So for number 1, again, I want the best value gardener possible. In number 2, I used that big Excel spreadsheet that we just went over to convert it into a theoretical hypothetical unit of value and found the best deal possible. And then number 3, look for areas of opportunity. Once you've identified the best hero you can purchase, look at similarly priced heroes and look at things that maybe other people are not looking at, like secondary class or summoning potential, recessive genes. So this is not everything you should consider, but I think it will really help you be methodical, systematic, mathematical in your approach to purchasing your first hero. I do hope it helped. In the next video, I'll probably start talking about some questing in the game, so I hope you're excited for that. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.